Hello viewers, welcome to World History Explored. Today we will talk about the history of Guatemala. The history of Guatemala begins with the Maya civilization, which was among those that flourished in their country. The country's modern history began with the Spanish conquest of Guatemala in 1524. Most of the Great Classic Era, 250 to 900 AD, Maya cities of the Petén Basin region, in the northern lowlands, had been abandoned by the year 1000 AD. The states in the Belize Central Highlands flourished until the 1525 arrival of Spanish conquistador Pedro de Alvarado. Called the invader by the Mayan people, Guatemala was part of the Captaincy General of Guatemala for nearly 330 years. This captaincy included what is now Chiapas in Mexico and the modern countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. The colony became independent in 1821 and then became a part of the First Mexican Empire until 1823. From 1824, it was a part of the Federal Republic of Central America. When the republic dissolved in 1841, Guatemala became fully independent. Before we go on, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Let's get started. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Guatemala's potential for agricultural exploitation attracted several foreign companies, most prominently the United Fruit Company, UFC. These companies were supported by the country's authoritarian rulers and the United States government through their support for brutal labor regulations and massive concessions to wealthy landowners. In 1944, the policies of George Ubico led to a popular uprising that began the 10-year Guatemalan Revolution. The presidencies of Juan José Arevalo and Jacobo Urbans saw sweeping social and economic reforms, including a significant increase in literacy and a successful agrarian reform program. Pre-Columbian Era. The earliest human settlements in Guatemala date back to the Paleo-Indian period and were made up of hunters and gatherers. Sites dating back to 6500 BC have been found in Quiché in the highlands and Sipacat, Escuintla on the central Pacific coast. Although it is unclear when these groups of hunters and gatherers turned to cultivation, by 2500 BC, small settlements were developing in Guatemala's Pacific lowlands in such places as Tlapa, where the oldest pieces of ceramic pottery from Guatemala have been found. Excavations in the Antigua Guatemala Urias and Rucal have yielded stratified materials from the early and middle preclassic periods, 2000 BC to 400 BC. Paste analyses of these early pieces of pottery in the Antigua Valley indicate they were made of clays from different environmental zones, suggesting people from the Pacific coast expanded into the Antigua Valley. Guatemala's pre-Columbian era can be divided into the preclassic period, from 2000 BC to 250 AD, the classic period, 250 to 900 AD, and the post-classic period, 900 to 1500 AD. Until recently, the preclassic was regarded as a formative period, consisting of small villages of farmers who lived in huts and few permanent buildings, but this notion has been challenged by recent discoveries of monumental architecture from that period, such as an altar in La Blanca, San Marcos, from 1000 BC, ceremonial sites at Miraflores and El Naranjo from 801 BC, and the Mirador Basin cities of Nakbay, Xolmal, El Tintal, Huacán, and El Mirador. In Monte Alto near La Democracia, Escuintla, giant stone heads and potbellies, or barragons, have been found, dating back to around 1800 BC. The stone heads have been ascribed to the pre-Olmec Monte Alto culture, and some scholars suggest the Olmec culture originated in the Monte Alto area. It has also been argued the only connection between the statues and the later Olmec heads is their size. The Monte Alto culture may have been the first complex culture of Mesoamerica and predecessor of all other cultures of the region. In Guatemala, some sites have unmistakable Olmec style, such as Chocol in Xochitepec, La Corona in Petén, and Tacalacabaj in Retalvulu, the last of which is the only ancient city in the Americas with Olmec and Mayan features. The Preclassic was regarded as a formative period, consisting of small villages of farmers who lived in huts and few permanent buildings, but this notion has been challenged by recent discoveries of monumental architecture from that period. Colonial Era. The colonial era of the history of Guatemala comprises the years from 1524, when the Spaniards conquered the country, to 1821, the foundations of modern Guatemala, 1849 to 1871. The mid-19th century in Guatemala marked the dawn of an era of transformation, as the country sought to lay the groundwork for modernization and confront its lingering political and social challenges. During these years, a liberal government rose to power with ambitions to revolutionize the Guatemalan state, focusing on economic development, infrastructure enhancement, and the modernization of agriculture. This period was instrumental in defining the country's future trajectory, as efforts were made to delineate Guatemala's territorial boundaries more clearly and initiate reforms that would propel the nation into a new era of progress. The liberal leadership embarked on ambitious projects to improve road networks, enhance port facilities, and encourage the cultivation of export crops, aiming to integrate Guatemala more fully into the global economy. These initiatives were part of a broader vision to transition the economy from one reliant on subsistence farming to one that could thrive on the production and export of cash crops. The government also undertook efforts to reform the education system and secularize the state, moving away from the conservative, church-dominated framework that had previously characterized Guatemalan society. However, this period was not without its challenges. The aggressive push for modernization and economic development often clashed with the interests and traditions of indigenous populations and rural communities, leading to tensions and resistance. Furthermore, the liberal government's policies disproportionately benefited a small elite, laying the groundwork for social disparities that would persist in Guatemala for decades. The pursuit of land for coffee cultivation, in particular, led to the displacement of many indigenous people, exacerbating social inequalities and sowing seeds of discord. Political instability remained a pervasive issue, with power struggles and coups punctuating the Guatemalan political landscape. The fluctuations in governance and policy direction during this time reflected the broader struggles within Guatemalan society to reconcile the forces of tradition and modernization. Despite these obstacles, the foundations laid between 1849 and 1871 were crucial in steering Guatemala toward the path of economic development and modern statehood, even as the nation continued to grapple with the complex interplay of progress, inequality, and resistance. The era of reforms in coffee, 1871 to 1944. The years between 1871 and 1944 in Guatemala were transformative, heralding a shift towards agricultural commercialization and exportation that would come to define the nation's economy. Central to this transformation was the booming coffee industry, which became the backbone of Guatemala's economic growth and a key player in the global market. The liberal reforms of the previous era set the stage for this agricultural revolution, emphasizing the importance of cash crops and export-led growth. During this period, the government facilitated the expansion of coffee cultivation through policies that favored large-scale plantations and foreign investment. Land previously held in common or used for subsistence farming was increasingly consolidated into vast coffee plantations, known as fincas, which required a significant labor force to maintain. This labor was often supplied by indigenous communities, whose relationship with the land was fundamentally altered. The push for coffee cultivation intensified land dispossession and led to a system of debt peonage that tied workers to plantations under exploitative conditions. The influence of the coffee elite on Guatemala's political and social systems cannot be overstated. Wealthy coffee planters leveraged their economic power to wield considerable influence over national policies, ensuring that the legal and infrastructural frameworks benefited their interests. This era saw the construction of railroads and the improvement of port facilities, specifically designed to support the exportation of coffee. Such developments further integrated Guatemala into the global economy, but did so in a way that entrenched the power of the coffee barons and perpetuated social inequalities. While the coffee industry spurred economic growth and modernization, it also deepened the divide between the wealthy elite and the majority of the population, who remained marginalized and impoverished. The concentration of wealth and land in the hands of a few, combined with the exploitative labor practices on coffee plantations, sowed the seeds of social unrest and contributed to the political instability that would characterize Guatemalan society in the years to come. This period, therefore, was one of both progress and paradox, as the foundations for economic prosperity were laid alongside the roots of future conflict. Democratic Spring and the CIA Coup, 1944 to 1954. The Democratic Spring in Guatemala represented a watershed moment for the nation, ushering in a period of significant social and political reform under the leadership of Presidents Juan José Arevalo and Jacobo Urbans. These reforms aimed to redress the long-standing inequalities and injustices that had become entrenched in Guatemalan society, particularly those affecting the rural and indigenous populations. The introduction of a more democratic constitution, labor laws, and land reform initiatives marked the era's commitment to creating a more equitable society. For the first time, there was a concerted effort to diminish the power of the large landowners.
Absolve the U.S. I'm very glad that the Guatemalan representative made it crystal clear that he makes no charge whatever against the United States government
and foreign corporations that had dominated the Guatemalan economy, especially the United Fruit Company, which had significant holdings in the country. However, these reforms sparked intense opposition from conservative elements within Guatemala, as well as from international interests worried about their investments. The situation escalated when the Urbans government moved to expropriate unused lands belonging to the United Fruit Company, compensating them based on the company's own tax declarations. This action, portrayed as a threat to foreign investments and labeled as communist by its detractors, became the catalyst for foreign intervention. The United States, during the Cold War era, viewed the progressive policies of the Urbans administration as a Soviet foothold in the Western Hemisphere. In response, the CIA launched Operation Peev's Success, a covert operation designed to overthrow the democratically elected government of Jacobo Urbans. The operation was successful, and in 1954, Urbans was deposed, leading to the installation of a military regime. This coup d'état marked the end of the Democratic Spring and initiated a period of authoritarian rule that rolled back the reforms and set the stage for the decades of civil unrest and armed conflict that would follow. The CIA coup drastically altered Guatemala's political landscape, extinguishing the hope for democracy and social justice that had briefly flourished during the Democratic Spring. The internal armed conflict, 1960 to 1996. The years spanning from 1960 to 1996 in Guatemala were characterized by an intense and violent internal armed conflict, which pitted the Guatemalan government against various guerrilla groups. The origins of this conflict were deeply rooted in the inequalities and grievances that had been building for decades, particularly those related to land distribution and the political marginalization of certain groups. As the government sought to quash dissent and maintain control, it employed tactics that resulted in severe human rights violations, leaving a dark stain on the nation's history. During this period, the government, backed by the military and supported by various right-wing paramilitary groups, engaged in systematic campaigns of repression against those it perceived as opponents or threats to the state's authority. This included targeted assassinations, enforced disappearances, and the use of torture against activists, suspected guerrilla sympathizers, and indigenous communities accused of supporting the insurgents. The violence was not limited to combatants. Entire villages were razed, and civilians, including women and children, were often caught in the crossfire or deliberately targeted in acts of terror designed to instill fear and suppress opposition. Indigenous peoples, who had long faced marginalization and dispossession of their lands, were disproportionately affected by the conflict. Many of the worst atrocities, including acts of genocide, were committed in indigenous areas, underlining the ethnic dimension of the violence. The scorched earth policies adopted by the military in these regions led to the devastation of communities, the destruction of cultural and economic livelihoods, and the displacement of thousands of people, further exacerbating the deep social divisions within the country. International attention and condemnation of the human rights abuses committed during the conflict eventually contributed to the push for a resolution. Yet the path to peace was fraught with challenges, as mistrust and the legacy of violence complicated efforts to address the underlying causes of the conflict. The signing of the peace accords in 1996 marked the official end of hostilities, but the scars left by 36 years of internal armed conflict continue to shape the social and political landscape of Guatemala.
Hoy es el momento de la paz. Hoy es el momento de la paz para Guatemala. Hoy se ha concretado parte de nuestra misión y de nuestra promesa.
Peace Accords and the Road to Recovery, 1996 to 2000. The signing of the peace accords in December 1996 heralded a new chapter for Guatemala, promising not only an end to decades of armed conflict, but also the beginning of a long journey toward national healing and reconstruction. These accords, the result of arduous negotiations, laid out a comprehensive framework aimed at dismantling the structures of violence and addressing the deep-seated issues that had fueled the conflict. Central to this framework were commitments to uphold human rights, recognize and respect indigenous cultures and rights, and undertake significant land reform efforts to rectify the historical injustices that had contributed to social unrest. Implementing the accords was a monumental task. Guatemala embarked on a path to rebuild its institutions, reweave the social fabric torn by years of violence, and foster a culture of peace and dialogue. Efforts to strengthen the justice system and enhance the rule of law were pivotal in this phase, aiming to ensure that the atrocities of the past would not be repeated. The creation of the Commission for Historical Clarification, CEH, played a crucial role in this process, documenting the violations committed during the conflict and providing a measure of truth and accountability essential for reconciliation. Addressing the rights and needs of the conflict's victims, particularly indigenous communities that had suffered disproportionately, was another cornerstone of the recovery efforts. Programs aimed at compensating and supporting these communities sought to restore dignity and promote social cohesion. However, the challenges were immense. Deep-seated poverty, lingering social inequalities, and continuing instances of discrimination and exclusion highlighted the long road ahead in achieving the comprehensive vision of the peace accords. As Guatemala navigated this complex landscape, the period from 1996 to 2000 was marked by a cautious optimism. The peace accords offered a blueprint for a more just and equitable society, but realizing this vision would require sustained commitment and effort from all sectors of Guatemalan society. Political instability and social movements, 2000 to 2016. The early 21st century in Guatemala was marked by turbulence and transformation, as a wave of political crisis and corruption scandals deeply impacted the governance and societal trust in the country. These challenges became a catalyst for widespread public unrest, sparking massive protests that highlighted the Guatemalan people's growing frustration with systemic corruption and the enduring legacy of impunity. These movements, unparalleled in their scale and intensity, underscored a demand for profound political reform and a more transparent, accountable government. Amidst this backdrop of political upheaval, a vibrant tapestry of grassroots organizations and civil society groups emerged, becoming instrumental in pushing for change. These entities harnessed the power of collective action, advocating for the protection of human rights, the promotion of social justice, and the strengthening of democratic institutions. Their efforts highlighted the crucial role of civic engagement in shaping Guatemala's political landscape and underscored the importance of participatory democracy as a means to address the nation's deep-seated issues. This period also witnessed a significant mobilization around issues of corruption, with landmark cases exposing the depth of graft within the highest echelons of government. Notably, the uncovering of corruption at the national level led to the resignation and subsequent prosecution of key political figures, a testament to the impact of sustained public pressure and the crucial role of independent investigative bodies in ensuring accountability. Despite the challenges, this era represented a pivotal moment in Guatemala's ongoing journey towards social and political renewal. The actions taken by the public and civil society not only demonstrated a resilient demand for change, but also set the stage for continued efforts to build a more just and equitable society. Please like this video, share and subscribe to our channel World History Explored for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and until next time.